Hello, and welcome to another episode of Philosophive. I'm your host, Justin Land, and today I'm with a good friend, Daniel Beaumont. He's an entrepreneur and explorer, I would say, and I'm happy to have him on the show. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, how are you doing, Justin? Long time no speak, my friend.
Definitely. No, we've been connected on Facebook, as you know, so the virtual connection. I've seen your development since we first met 4 years ago here in Leipzig, and I began. I was impressed with your positivity and your clear focus that you had on your projects, which one of them opening up a hostel uh, based on very cool concepts that came into realization, which is from a situation where you didn't have necessarily the means, but you had the vision and it came true. And I would like to just hear a little bit about your story and where you are now, how that your journey as an explorer in this world. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a long story.
True.
I've only been on the planet for 29 years, but I've had the opportunity to go around the world and learn about myself through experiences, both good, bad, and indifferent. Um, to cut a very long story short, I grew up in the UK in a small town called Kendal in the Lake District, which, if you're not familiar with the Lake District, it's near Scotland, kind of like in the north of England where all the sheep and mountains are and old people. My childhood was very adventurous and full of nature and full of sports, and I was always curious from a young age about going on adventures. I'd read atlases, I'd read books about traveling the world and all kinds of different things. And this really came to fruition later on in my life, which I'll get to in a little bit. But that's an important point because most of what we are is deriving right out of our childhood. Um, I grew up in a family with just my mum and my two sisters, and my dad left at a young age, like he was struggling with alcohol and all kinds of things, and him and my mum weren't getting on great, so they split up when I was about 5 years old, and that kind of led me on a little bit of an angry teenage path. I was in all kinds of fights and trouble when I was at school. I introduced myself to alcohol at a very young age of 12. Um, when I found like friends, and the means of getting along with each other was socializing, and normally alcohol came with that. So my teenage years were very temperamental. I was either on a typical night out, I would either be very loving and happy and kind, or if you caught me on the wrong day, I would be feisty and aggressive and angry, and I often got into fights and all kinds of trouble. But I was a really dedicated student, and this level of discipline has shone throughout my life. I was very focused. Um, I did well at school as well. I didn't step out of line at all. I was just this kind of little bit of a rebel outside of school, kind of like Jekyll and Hyde in many ways. So I went through my teenage years with a lot of repressed anger towards my father, um, and I didn't know why at the time, and I didn't even think about questioning that or anything. But I was kind of functional at the same time. I was, like I said, decent at school. And that got me to university, and I started mellowing down a little bit there. I chose to study business because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. A very general topic, and I could explore many different things in that, like law and psychology and finance. And my university years were very, very beautiful. I met some really cool guys who showed me a different perspective of the world, and I started mellowing down a little bit. I was still drinking and being cheeky and causing some problems, but I wasn't nearly as bad as I was in my teenage years. But I met this one guy in particular called Joe, and he's my best friend. And after university, I graduated with a degree, and I was set to get a job in the banking world of all things. That sounds crazy, thinking that that was the case now. And I was set to get a job in London, and Joe said to me, let's go and travel. Let's just take time out, and let's go and explore ourselves. And there wasn't much more thought that went into that. I decided to join him on his adventure, and we flew out to Australia, of all places, with the idea that we could pick up some work in the outback. Joe had a friend who had worked previously 2 years before in the outback. So we arrived in this small town called Griffith in the middle of nowhere, and we started working on a grain farm for the next 6 months. And we lived in the middle of nowhere, 60 kilometers from a shop or normality. And for 6 months of our lives, we just worked day in, day out, 7 days a week, shoveling grain in the 50 degrees heat. And in short, that experience really had an impact on us. We realized how naive and kind of like immature we'd been, like through university, and this really kind of gave us a reality check. We were working with older people who had been in the job for 30 years, really, really interesting people with great stories, but there was nothing to do at all. So you would have to just be with yourself, because we lived on site. We lived in a little porter cabin that was there on site, but a great experience. And it really opened my eyes to what how travel can be used as a form of self-discovery and learning. And this would shape much of my next 3 years. So after the grain, after we'd saved up a load of money, we bought a little crappy car, and we took it all around the coast of Australia. And while we were on that trip, it was raining really badly one night, and we were so sick of camping out beside the car. So we decided, we were in this place called Katoomba, and we decided, let's just go and stay in a hostel. And so we found this hostel in the Blue Mountains, and literally walked in. And the first thing I remember was just seeing so many people from different countries around the world. And they were socializing, having fun. They were playing beer pong or something like that. But yet there was this receptionist who looked miserable, who looked like she didn't want to be there at all. And it clicked to me in that moment that there was something special in this idea of a hostel. And me and Joe decided that we'd set out on a journey to create our own. I'm giving you a very fast version of the story here, because we only have 35 minutes or so. And that basically led me on a trip all around the world, trying to work out what made a great hostel, and trying to discover what it was that people want from a hostel. So I visited like 300, 400 hostels. I collected and made all kinds of different writings and journals about my experiences at hostels. I couch surfed and I Airbnb'd. I did different forms of hospitality. And that eventually materialized into what is known as the Podstel concept now. And through some adventures, like along the way, we motorbiked across Asia, we hiked in the Himalayas, I hitchhiked across the whole of North America and Europe as well. But ultimately, we were building this concept, which materialized into Podstel, which roughly defined is a place where people from all around the world can come together with locals to share experience and connect. Very simple. We saw the hostel as kind of like a domain which was really beautiful for socializing and this and that, but there was also this learning aspect, that all of these beautiful people came with all of these diverse skills, stories, passions, interests, but they weren't given the opportunity to share them. So we wanted to create a place where they could share them things. And that's what Podstel manifested into. So it's not a hostel. It's more like a community space where people can come together and share what they love. And that manifests in the form of events, workshops, performances, all kinds of like storytelling, from yoga to meditation to all kinds of stuff goes on in our place. Nothing is off bar. And ultimately, when I got to Europe in 2015, after 3 years of continuous travel and all of these adventures, we decided to hitchhike across Europe to try and find the place where we would start the first Podstel. Seems crazy, like looking back on that now and thinking that that was actually our agenda. So we flew to Greece. This was me and the team that I developed, my best friend, and then 3 others. We flew to Greece, to Athens, and then decided to hitchhike across Europe trying to find the place where we'd start. And that we had in mind that that place was going to be Berlin. And we didn't get to Berlin. As you know, I met you in Leipzig. We got to Leipzig of all places. And when we got to Leipzig, we fell in love with the vibe of the city. And we were like, wow, this has something special here. Let's not do Berlin. Let's try and set up Podstel in Leipzig. So at that moment in time, we didn't have much money left from our travels. Like we'd spent a lot of money in doing all of these trips and adventures and building the concept. But we did have a lot of passion, and we had the team as well. So what happened is that we used the last of our money to rent an apartment in Leipzig. I remember having to forge the contract and because you had to prove that you were employed to be able to pay the rent. We had the money, but we didn't have a job or anything. Like we were just bummers, kind of like trying to make things work. And we managed to find an apartment, Bernhardstrasse, 34, and we moved into the apartment. We had no furniture or anything, and I know that Leipzig is a very sharing, culture-friendly place. So we managed to get all of our furniture from like these just websites where people were giving stuff away or giving it away for really cheap. And we furnished our whole apartment with furniture from these websites. And then we decided to turn it into a small Podstel, like a beta version of Podstel. So what we did, we had 2 rooms, 2 bedrooms. Me, Jason, and Sam, the founders of Podstel, slept in one of the rooms, and then we rented one of the rooms on Airbnb just to cover our costs. And then we had this huge living room area, which was kind of like a multifunctional space. We'd have family meals there. You came to a few of them. We had all kinds of like stuff going on in there, but we'd also invite couch surfers over to sleep the night. And it basically just operated as a mini hostel. And there was a wall that you could sign. We had t-shirts with the Podstel logo. There was this whole philosophy behind it. And in short, we ran that place for like 6 months to a year. And one of our couch surfers, a guy called Paolo, he came in August 2015. And it was at the time, it was a really beautiful vibe in the place, and it was really special. And there was so many activities going on. We had a really good friend group who were coming in for meals and stuff like that. And Paolo came and stayed with us and saw what we were trying to create. And at the end of his stay, after having an amazing 3 days and we got on and vibed really well, he took us for a walk and said, guys, I really love what you're doing here. I really love what you're doing here. It's special. How can I help? He's a doctor. He hasn't had that much time in his life to set up a hostel, but it had been his dream. And he was like, I want to become your investor. And at that moment in time, it was only the finances that were missing from this triangle of team, passion, finances. And he was like, let's do this on a bigger scale. Let's go and find a building and do this properly, not in some random flat in Leipzig. And that set us on this whole journey of like looking for a place online. We were looking at locations like Porto and Berlin and London and Barcelona, some exotic locations like this. And then this opportunity came up for a place in Bucharest. So we traveled to Bucharest just on a whim, just to see what this opportunity was and to explore it more. hadn't been to Bucharest ever before in my life. And we got to Bucharest, and the place that we visited was really bad, and it wasn't what we were looking for. And then on the final day, me and Sam were like jaded, and we were like, let's just go for a walk. So we went for a walk, and we stumbled upon the street that our hostel is currently at. And this is where the story twists, and I guess law of attraction comes in here. We were walking down the street, and there was a to let sign on this building, and we just peeked into the garden just to see what was going on. And we were like, wow, this is it. And in that moment, we knew that this was the place that we'd been looking for 4 or 5 years, trying to set up. And it turned out that the place was to let. And within a month, we moved out to Bucharest. We took over the place, and we basically lived in the hostel and built up a hostel from nothing, and a cafe as well. So we created this cafe for locals, hostel for travelers in the same space, and manifested a lot of what we had dreamed of Podstel being. And that was 2016. So 3.5 years later, just to speed up the story a little bit, that's resulted in all kinds of beautiful experiences and workshops and memorable memories and awards from Hostel World, and a second Podstel in Bucharest as well. And now I'm here in 2020, and we have a really like comprehensive business going on, and we have 20 staff, and we're looking after all kinds of travelers, 110 from 110 countries, 10,000 travelers a year. And we're bringing locals and travelers together to share and learn, just like the original philosophy as we promised. So that's the story in short. And personally, I've been on my own adventures during that time as well. Like this idea of adventure, writing, and movement has been very close to me. And over the last years, I've spent time walking 4 different Camino de Santiago's, which is a pilgrimage across Spain. I've walked that 4 times. And I basically use these as like a clarity month, because running a hostel is full on, and you're constantly stressed and moving, and there's always a problem. So I use this time as for me to reflect and to introspect and to write and to be with myself, and I'll turn everything off and just go and walk across Spain. And this has become kind of like one of many rituals in my life that when I'm struggling, I immediately go to nature, or I go running, or I go for a walk. And this has kind of been my own therapy for dealing with much of the chaos that I inherently deal with by doing what I do here. So that's the story in short. That was a really fast version of the story.
You said it well.
And if we had more time, I would tell you more, but I want to focus on giving value here. So I mean, you probably got some questions.
Yes. We have it. I just want to. I mean, what interests me the most, obviously, is when I met you, your positivity vibe came clear, and I was very curious because your passion about this idea was fascinating. You know, it was an idea that you had for quite some time. You explained the story about how it came about, the desire, and you went from nothing, really. I think that it was a bit of a long way, but it sounds like you had fun along the way, and the actual realization of the manifestation when it did come, it was not just the manifestation of that location that just coincidentally, it wasn't the one you thought it was. No, but then you went around, but then also the guy giving you, who actually stayed at your quasi beta hostel, came and said I think he was impressed with you guys the most. And I can imagine it, that's what really makes one certain that there's something here. And the idea was great too, but you need the people behind it to push it forward. And you did. Once it came, I see how you guys have progressed, and the idea of traveling and bringing that mix of learning and experiences into a location is a very interesting one. You know, hostels have that naturally built into it. You know, and it sounds to me like you're actually aiming to get people who normally wouldn't go to a hostel. This Podstel maybe would be see the advantages to that than going to a normal hotel, because it's some place where you can learn about things, presentations, yoga. It's like a university setting of some sort, I'm guessing, you know, and a cultural,
Yeah.
and that's adding, you know, that's giving an old idea something new, you know, and that was in your mind, and but throughout the whole process, I'm guessing, although you had your setbacks, your vibration of, you know, it's very aligned. I think it was so aligned with this idea. You knew it was going to happen because,
Mm.
right? I mean, you were throughout the whole time. You didn't doubt it would be in some form, right?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I did doubt at times,
Mm-hmm.
but I had conviction as well at the same time, and I see it in other people as well. It's this burning desire and conviction that you're going to achieve something, and I'd seen it so vividly in my mind that it was just a matter of bouncing out the steps to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there was points in Leipzig when I thought like, wow, this is hard and it's not going to happen. But that's that's the inevitable on every journey.
Right.
But it was really, I've always been a very disciplined, determined, energetic, ambitious person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I'm not going to say that this isn't nurtured, but I've always been like that since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So and we had a good idea, but an idea by itself is nothing. You need to execute on that idea, and we did take the long route round, like you said. This could have been done in 2 years, but we wanted to make it an adventure, and we wanted to have good stories to tell by the end of it. And in hindsight, I have no regrets for how all of this has gone. It's really like I feel like I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve when we set out on this journey. And Podstel is not a hostel. Like we used this kind of like idea that it was a hostel. It's not. It was much more than that. It was this social space where community could form and people could come together to learn. And we've realized that that was our limitation, that calling ourselves a hostel for so many years was a limitation. And the evolution of Podstel that's going to be taking place over the next years is going towards more of this idea as a community space where people can come together and share and learn. But that's going to be the next chapter of the story. But yeah, burning desire and having conviction around your idea. Of course, there's going to be doubt in there as well, but the burning desire is stronger than the doubt.
Where did this burning desire come from exactly? Because it sounds like, okay, the travel, you had that hard time in Australia, and you proved to yourself you can get through that, I guess. And I think you were happy probably to have left the farm, and then just to travel. And I just like, do you need that kind of friction to kind of set the flame in motion? Like if it, you know, if you didn't have that struggle aspect, that contrast, the fire wouldn't have burned, right? I mean, can one say this? Is this how you felt it?
Yeah. I think you're on point there. That what's always driven me is this very stoic way of looking at life. So it's this idea that anything valuable or good in life comes through this idea of struggle. So if it was easy, and normally in my experience, if it has been easy, it's not been worthwhile. So I really have this perspective that like I welcome resistance. I welcome the more difficult, but I don't see it as something that I should run away from. I see it as something that as long as it's not going to kill me, as long as it's not going to hurt me, like dramatically, then it's useful. And then I think having a long perspective of life and looking at the situation over the long term, you can put into perspective most things. And you can see that like most of the stuff that we deal with on a day-to-day basis just has no effect over the long term. But it's important that we face them things. There's all kinds of like fears and things in the mind that stop us from pursuing the stuff that we're meant to be doing, and rightly so as well. There's a little bit of naivety that comes with pursuing an idea, and I would say that I was very naive, and that it was actually that naivety that got me in my skin in the game of actually even thinking Podstel was possible. Because the amount of people that told me, Daniel, just quit, Daniel, this is not going to work, I heard it every day. But when you're so convicted, when you're so sure about something happening, you'll do anything to make it happen.
Well, we can jump back, because this is something that you comes up quite often with you, because you hitchhiked as well throughout the U.S. I know that, and
Yeah.
I remember you told me you used the app Tinder to help you get across the United States. I thought that was a fascinating, very creative way to achieve something, where most people cannot imagine. How can you do that without getting from point A to point B without preparation, and you've done this several times, and I think you've proven to yourself that you can do under very minimal conditions quite big things. So that's maybe the stoic aspect you were talking about, that at the same time we don't want to make it too hard on ourselves. I think you probably you see how your clarity now is at a level where I think you would accept more into your life, a situation where somebody would just give you the money, even 100 or 200,000. I think it took a little bit of time before that investor. I'm just thinking like how this came out in the script writer way if I were writing the movie, right? But it's like you have to be at a point where you can accept that, and some of us, we need to get through a little bit of struggle to accept, those type of just giving, and I don't know what your perspective on that is. Have you, it's like, it has to do, I think, with the self-love as well. Obviously the idea that you're worthy enough. Everybody is worthy enough, and we're here for to discover who we are more and more, and it keeps on growing and never ends. And
you're totally on point here, that we're our own worst enemy, and most times that gets the better of us, and we'll come up with some beautiful ideas and we won't act on them because we think we're stupid, we haven't got enough time. All kinds of different reasons come in to the mind during this kind of like convincing you that you should stay where you are and do what you're currently doing. But the only way that I've seen in my life to accelerate anything is to change. And the only way that you can change is by changing your mindset and attitude. And that's something that's within you. That's something that's in your power. You can't control the world, but you can control how you react to what's happening in the world. It's stimulus and response. So a stimulus comes in, and then there's a split second, this point in your mind where you get to perceive how to interpret that stimulus, and then the response hits off from that. And I really realize now that although I can't control the world, this is very stoic again, although I can't control the world, I can always choose how I react.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't hurt me, to the extent, if it's, I don't want to hurt myself, and like, I don't want to tell people to like just go towards everything that you resist and stuff like this, because some stuff is harmful. But what's been useful for me is just approaching it like a Camino. So what's the smallest thing I could do right now to take me in the direction of my dream or whatever it is I want to achieve? Because I see it so many times, and running's a good example. Friends who start running, for example, they'll say to themselves, I'm going to get up tomorrow, I'm going to run 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, and they've never ran before in their life. and they get out and they'll be able to run 10 kilometers probably, and they'll do it for a week, but then they lose enthusiasm because it's so much activation energy to be able to get from 0 to 10 straight away. And they'll focus on running a really good time, and they may even run a good time. But what I know is that it's a long game and it's small steps. So what I would say, and how I approach it, and how I've always approached anything, any new skill acquisition, any journey that I've ever been on, starting Podstel, is what is the smallest step I can take right now?
Right.
If the idea is to have a Podstel at the end of it, what's the simplest, smallest thing I can do to get me from A to B when I'm going to be going to Z? And it's this idea of like knowing, having a broader sense of what the long-term perspective is and where you want to go, your vision, but then working backwards and reverse engineering that vision down into the smallest micro steps possible. And then this is how you keep your enthusiasm. Little hits of hurt instead of one massive big hurt. Because of course, when I'm walking the Camino, every year I walked 1,250 kilometers from Seville to Santiago last year. I was day 3 into my journey this time last year.
How long does it take? How long did it take?
30 days ish. But this is my point here. If I said to myself at the start of that journey, oh right, I've got 1,250 kilometers to walk, I'm gonna melt. I'm gonna break down. I'm not gonna be motivated to walk. But if I say to myself, right, I'm just gonna get to that town that's 5 kilometers in front of me, there's so much more beauty and applicability in that I'm more likely gonna achieve it. And I can celebrate these small wins along the way. And this is how I approach everything. It's this Kaizen kind of like step-by-step process. And then while you're taking them steps, you're going to get feedback along the way. And it's like, okay, how do I take in that feedback, and how do I make my next step better than the last step? But you also might go back a few steps. You might take a wrong turn, and that's fine. But you have your vision, which is to get to Santiago, which is 1,250 kilometers away. But you're just taking these micro steps, these 5 kilometer steps, you could call them, or whatever. And that's how I've approached everything. So to see the whole pie, it's very important to know what you want. Otherwise, it's like you're walking on a random route to nowhere. You're not going to Santiago. You don't even know where you're going. So it's important to have a broader perspective on your vision, but then to really micro in on where you are now and be like, what's the smallest thing I can do right now? And then over time, you build the habits to be able to take on bigger and bigger feats. Like I would have never imagined just 4 or 5 years ago that I would walk 1,300 kilometers across Spain in 30 days and have no problems, apart from some blisters and stuff like that. And it'd be some of the best time of my life. And then same with Podstel as well. You mentioned that we took the long route, quite literally as well. And it's taken 7 years to build. 7 years. And for the first 4 years, there was nothing tangible. It was only in the last 3 years that we actually had a place. Yeah. And before that, it was this random flat in Leipzig for six months to a year. So like, it's really, most people will just give up early because they lose perspective of what they're going towards or whatever. So it's this, in conclusion, this idea of being able to keep that long-term perspective, that long-term vision, but to focus on taking the small steps right in front of you. And it's this weird kind of like paradoxical thing that's happening right there. It's like, be short-term at the same time as being extremely long-term focused.
Well, I think that's a good point to conclude on. And it's I mean, I would probably add just to that a little bit that one has to be open to the possibility that it could be much better. and that the
Yeah.
goal and the way is the goal, as we know. So even though you've reached achieving Podstel, the idea has manifested and changed as well, and who you are, and obviously you're going to have more different goals once you achieve that one, and it's a never ending process, and I think we have to get comfortable with that we're going nowhere really. In this
Yeah.
respect, it's a beautiful, we're reaching things that are, you know, achieving things, and and we are meant to enjoy that. But I think with you, you've enjoyed the process, the steps, and that's what gave also kept that burning aspect, you know. And if Podstel didn't open up, I'm sure something else would have happened to you that would
Yeah.
have been perhaps just as good or better, you know, some sort of other project, because you know that's I think part of your journey. And I'm very happy that you're able to share it with us on this podcast. And I wish
Thank
you
you.
the best of
Thank
luck.
you.
And I want to
Thank
put all your details below so people can find out more about Podstel and who you are. And you do a travel blog, I think, and as you have what was it called, the Zen?
you. I just have my own website now. So
Okay, you had some sort of a little Zen
I'll
blog.
travel blog.
Yeah, that was awesome. I loved your entries. You're a great writer as well. We didn't get into much detail about that, but people can look about the stuff you've written about. It's awesome, man.
Yeah,
So
thank you,
especially that
Justin.
article that you on the Tinder, right, using Tinder for traveling. That's awesome too.
It was a long time ago now. Gosh.
Dude, thanks for catching up. There goes my buzzer now.
Yeah.
But and I wish you the best of luck, man.
All right, take care, and I'll hopefully see you soon.
Definitely, man.
All right,
Bye.
bye bye.